Starving Apache widow pleaded. "Take my children," the ranch owner said. "I'll take you too." The grave was still fresh when the woman stood alone beside it. The dry desert wind moved the loose soil, as if the land itself refused to let the moment stay quiet. Her husband had been buried that morning with simple prayers and no ceremony. There were no elders left to speak for him, no relatives to share the weight of grief. Only his widow and their 2 children stood there, hands empty, hearts heavy. She did not cry loudly. Tears were precious now, like everything else. She held her daughter close with one arm and rested her other hand on her son's thin shoulder. Both children were too young to fully understand death, but they knew enough to feel fear. They had seen their father grow weaker day by day. They had watched him cough through the nights and struggle to stand in the mornings. When he finally stopped breathing, the silence felt louder than any sound. The widow had no time to stay at the grave. Hunger did not wait for morning. As the sun climbed higher, she led her children back toward their small shelter made of worn cloth and wood. It stood on the edge of land that did not belong to anyone who would protect them. Her husband had once worked seasonally at nearby ranches, fixing fences, moving cattle, doing whatever work was offered. His hands had kept them alive. Now those hands were gone. Inside the shelter there was almost nothing left. A small sack of grain sat in the corner, nearly empty. A cracked clay pot held water that tasted of dust. The widow sat on the ground and counted what little they had. She measured it carefully, already knowing the truth. Even if she stretched the food, it would last only a few days. After that, there would be nothing. That night the children slept early, weak and quiet. The widow stayed awake, listening to their breathing. Every sound mattered now. She thought of all the choices she could make, and how few of them were real choices at all. She could stay and hope for help that might never come. She could walk to nearby settlements where she had been turned away before. Or she could do the thing she feared the most, ask someone to take her children. Pride is strong, especially when it is all a person has left. She had always taught her children to stand tall, to remember who they were, to never beg. But hunger does not respect pride. Hunger does not care about dignity. It only takes and takes until there is nothing left. Over the next days, the widow tried everything she could. She walked long distances under the burning sun, offering to work in exchange for food. She gathered wild roots and dry berries, but the land was tired and offered little. She traded a small handmade bracelet for a loaf of bread, cutting it into thin pieces so the children could eat more often. She pretended not to be hungry when they asked why she did not eat. People looked at her with mixed expressions, some with pity, others with suspicion. A few turned away without speaking. A few offered kind words but no help. Each refusal felt heavier than the last. She began to see how invisible she had become, how easily people looked past her as if she and her children were already gone. The children grew quieter. Her son, once curious and full of questions, now sat still for long periods, his eyes dull with exhaustion. Her daughter cried at night, her small body shaking from cold and hunger. The widow wrapped them both in the same thin blanket, holding them close, wishing she could give them strength from her own body. One evening, as the sky turned red and gold, she heard laughter from far away. It came from the direction of a large ranch, a place her husband had once mentioned but rarely worked at. The ranch belonged to a man known for having land, cattle, and order. He was not known for kindness, but he was known for fairness. She had avoided that place before, fearing rejection, fearing humiliation. That night, she made a decision that felt like cutting away a piece of her own heart. If she stayed where she was, her children would not survive. If she walked to the ranch, there was at least a chance, even if that chance meant losing them. Before sunrise, she packed what little they owned. There was not much to carry. She cleaned the children's faces, braided her daughter's hair, and adjusted her son's worn shirt. She wanted them to look cared for even if they were starving. Appearances still mattered in a world that judged quickly. The walk was long. The sun rose higher with each step, and the ground burned through her worn shoes. The children stumbled often, and she stopped again and again to lift them, whispering encouragement. She told them stories as they walked, stories their father once told them, stories of strength and survival. She did not tell them where they were going or why. By the time the ranch fence came into view, her legs trembled. The children leaned heavily against her, barely able to stand. Dust covered their clothes and their lips were dry. The widow paused for a moment, gathering herself. This was the point of no return. Once she stepped through that gate, her life would change forever, one way or another. She remembered her husband's face, the way he looked at her in his final days, not with fear but with trust. He had trusted her to protect their children. That memory pushed her forward. As she reached the gate, she heard voices inside the ranch. Workers moved about, starting the day. A few noticed her and stared. She could feel their eyes, sharp and curious. Her hands shook, but she did not turn back. She asked for the owner. While she waited, standing in the open sun with her children at her side, doubt crept in. What if he refused? What if he took the children and sent her away? What if she was treated with anger instead of mercy? Each question tightened around her chest like a rope, but she stayed. Because behind her was only hunger and death, and ahead of her was at least the possibility of life. When the ranch owner finally appeared in the distance, tall and calm, the widow lowered her head slightly, not in submission, but in respect. She held her children closer and prepared to speak words she never imagined she would have to say. This was not the end of her story. It was the moment everything began. The widow stood at the gate longer than she expected. The sun was already climbing, and its heat pressed down on her head and shoulders. Her children leaned against her legs, too tired to complain. Dust covered their feet, and their breaths came slow and shallow. She kept one hand on each child, as if holding them tighter could keep them safe from whatever might happen next. People on the ranch noticed her. A few workers slowed their steps. Some whispered. Others pretended not to see her at all. She felt every look like a weight on her back. Still, she did not move away. Leaving now would mean walking back to nothing. After some time, a man approached her. He was not young, but he moved with calm strength. His clothes were clean but worn from work. His eyes were sharp, the kind that missed very little. This was the ranch owner. He stopped a short distance away and looked at the woman and the children. He did not speak right away. He took in their thin faces, their dry lips, the way the children leaned into their mother as if she were the only thing holding them up. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice steady, not unkind but not warm either. The widow felt her throat tighten. She had practiced her words in her mind during the long walk, but now they felt heavy and difficult to release. She lowered her eyes, not because she felt less than him, but because looking straight at him felt too hard. "My children," she began softly. Her voice shook, but she forced herself to continue. "They are hungry. I cannot feed them anymore." The ranch owner listened without interrupting. His face did not change. She swallowed and went on. "If you can take them, if you can give them food and work when they are older, that is all I ask." She paused. Her hands trembled as she placed them gently on her children's shoulders. "I will leave," she added quickly. "I do not ask for myself, only for them." The words felt like knives cutting her from the inside. Every part of her wanted to scream, to beg, to cry. But she did none of those things. She stood still, offering the most painful gift a mother can offer, letting go. The ranch owner looked at the children again. The boy tried to stand straighter, as if showing he was strong enough to work. The girl pressed her face into her mother's side, her fingers gripping the fabric of her dress. There was a long silence. The widow's heart pounded. She thought of all the ways this could end badly. He could refuse them all. He could take the children and send her away. He could call others and turn this moment into shame. Finally, the man spoke again. "You would leave them?" he asked. "Yes," she replied, forcing the word out. "If it means they live." He nodded slowly. Then he surprised her. "No," he said, her chest tightened. For a moment she could not breathe. The single word echoed in her mind, loud and final, but then he continued, "I will not take children and leave their mother outside my gate." She looked up, unsure she had heard him correctly. "They stay," he said, "and you stay too." Her knees almost gave way. The world tilted for a second and she had to steady herself. "Sir," she said, her voice barely more than a whisper, "I cannot pay you, I have nothing." He shook his head. "You will work," he replied. "All who live here work, that is enough." Tears filled her eyes, but she quickly wiped them away. This was not the time to break down. She bowed her head slightly, a sign of deep respect. "Thank you," she said. The words felt small compared to what he had just offered. The ranch owner motioned for them to follow him. Workers opened the gate wider, their faces filled with curiosity. As the widow and her children stepped onto the ranch land, she felt a strange mix of relief and fear. This place was large, orderly, and unfamiliar. She did not know what kind of life waited for them here. They were taken first to the kitchen. The smell of food filled the air, rich and warm. The children froze at the doorway, unsure if it was real. When a bowl of soup was placed in front of them, they stared at it as if it might disappear. "Eat slowly," the ranch owner said. "You've been without food too long." The widow watched carefully as her children lifted their spoons. She reminded them softly to take small bites. She did not touch her own bowl until she was sure they were eating safely. Only then did she allow herself a few sips, feeling warmth spread through her body for the first time in days. As they ate, the ranch owner stood nearby, watching quietly. He saw how the woman kept glancing at her children, how she ate less than them, how her shoulders finally relaxed just a little. After the meal, the children were shown a small room where they could rest. Clean blankets were placed over them. They fell asleep almost instantly, their bodies giving in to exhaustion now that hunger was no longer pressing so hard. The widow remained standing. She did not sit. She did not rest. "What work do you need me to do?" she asked. The ranch owner studied her for a moment. "You will help in the kitchen," he said, "cleaning, cooking. Later we will see what else you can do," she nodded. "I will do everything you ask." "I don't doubt that," he replied. As the day went on, she worked without stopping. She scrubbed floors, washed pots, carried water. Her hands were raw by evening, but she did not complain. Each task felt like proof that she deserved to be there. Still, not everyone was pleased. Some workers whispered that she was a burden. Others wondered why the owner would take in people who had nothing. She heard the words but pretended not to. She had learned long ago that listening to such things only weakened the heart. That night, when she lay down near her children, sleep did not come easily. Her body was tired, but her mind was full. She thought about the choice she had made at the gate. She thought about how close she had come to losing everything. She did not know how long this safety would last. She did not know if the ranch owner's kindness would remain once people began to talk more. But for the first time since her husband's death, her children were fed and sleeping peacefully. That was enough for now. Outside, the ranch was quiet. The stars shone brightly over the land. The widow closed her eyes, holding her children close, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges. But she had crossed the gate, and crossing it had saved their lives. Life on the ranch did not become easy just because the widow and her children had crossed the gate. Safety did not mean comfort. It only meant that hunger no longer stood at the door every hour of the day. The woman understood this quickly and accepted it without complaint. She woke before sunrise every morning. While the sky was still dark, she moved quietly so she would not wake her children. She washed her face with cold water, tied her hair back, and went straight to work. The kitchen was her main place, but there was always more to do. Floors needed cleaning, clothes needed washing, food needed preparing for many people. She worked with steady hands and a focused mind, never slowing unless told to rest. At first, people watched her closely. Some did so out of curiosity, others with doubt. A few believed she would not last long. They whispered that she was too thin, too quiet, too different. She heard these things but chose silence. She had learned that answering every doubt wasted strength. Her children stayed near her when they could. The boy helped carry small items and followed instructions carefully. He tried hard to prove he was useful, afraid that if he seemed weak, they might be sent away. The girl stayed closer to her mother, watching everything with wide eyes. She smiled more now, but only when she felt safe. The ranch owner kept his distance. He did not speak much to the widow, but he watched her work. He noticed how she never wasted food, how she repaired broken tools instead of asking for new ones, how she thanked people quietly when they showed kindness. He also noticed how she corrected her children gently, never raising her voice, never letting frustration turn into anger. Days passed, then weeks. The children slowly grew stronger. Color returned to their faces. Their steps became lighter. They laughed sometimes when they thought no one was listening. Those sounds brought both comfort and fear to the widow. Comfort because it meant they were healing. Fear because Joy felt fragile, like something that could be taken away at any moment. Not everyone accepted them. Some workers treated the children kindly, sharing small treats or teaching them simple tasks. Others kept their distance. A few made sharp comments, not directly but loud enough to be heard. The widow kept her eyes down and continued working. She knew that reacting would only make things harder. One afternoon, a small problem turned into a bigger one. A worker accused the boy of breaking a tool. The boy stood frozen, his hands shaking. He tried to explain that he had only touched it after it was already damaged. His words came out tangled and nervous. The widow stepped forward calmly. She asked to see the tool. She examined it carefully, turning it in her hands. Then she explained in simple words that the damage was old and caused by wear, not by force. Her voice was steady. She did not accuse anyone. She only stated what she saw. The ranch owner, who had been nearby, listened. He looked at the tool and agreed with her. The matter was settled. That evening, the boy sat quietly beside his mother. "I thought we would have to leave," he said softly. She placed her hand on his head. "Not today," she replied, "but we must always be careful." As time went on, the widow noticed that the ranch owner began to trust her more. He asked her opinion on small things in the kitchen. He gave her responsibility without making a show of it. He did not praise her openly, but he did not question her either. One day, a sickness spread among the animals. A few fell weak and people grew worried. Losing animals meant losing food and income. The widow watched closely as others struggled to find a solution. After some hesitation, she spoke up. She shared a method her people had used for generations, simple steps, using things already available. Some laughed quietly, others listened. The ranch owner listened. He allowed her to try. Slowly, the animals improved. The sickness did not spread further. Relief settled over the ranch like a deep breath after panic. After that, things changed a little. People began to look at her differently, not as someone who had been taken in out of pity, but as someone who had something to give. The whispers did not disappear, but they softened. The children were treated with more patience. The widow felt a small shift in the air, like the first sign of rain after a long, dry season. Still, she never forgot her place. She never acted as if she expected kindness. Every day she worked as if it might be her last there. One evening, the ranch owner spoke to her directly for longer than usual. They stood outside as the sun lowered, painting the land in warm colors. He asked her about her past, not in detail, but enough to understand her path. She answered honestly without drama. She spoke of her husband, of work, of loss. She did not blame anyone. She did not ask for sympathy. He nodded quietly. "You are strong," he said, not as praise but as a fact. She replied, "I had no choice." Winter approached slowly. The air grew cooler at night. The widow repaired clothes, made sure the children were prepared. She saved every extra scrap she could just in case. Safety still felt temporary in her heart. Then an offer came. A traveler who knew her people recognized her. He spoke of a place where she and the children could go, where others like them lived together. He offered help, a way out, a chance to return to something familiar. That night the widow did not sleep. Leaving would mean starting again. It would mean walking away from the ranch, from the fragile stability they had built. Staying meant facing continued judgment, uncertainty, and hard work. At sunrise, she made her choice. She stayed. Not because she had nowhere else to go, but because here, for the first time since her husband's death, she was not only surviving, she was choosing her life. And that choice gave her a strength she had never felt before. The winter arrived quietly but firmly. Nights grew longer and the wind carried a sharp cold that slipped through walls and clothing. The ranch prepared as best it could. Extra food was stored, animals were moved closer, and work became harder. The widow felt the change in her bones. Cold always reminded her of loss, of how quickly life could turn against you. She worked even harder now. Her hands were rough, her back often sore, but she did not slow down. She rose before dawn and finished late. She made sure the kitchen stayed warm, that meals were filling, and that nothing went to waste. She taught her children to help where they could and to stay respectful and alert. The children had changed. The boy was taller now, stronger and more confident. He helped with small tasks around the ranch and listened carefully to instructions. The girl had learned to smile again. She helped her mother fold clothes and sweep floors, humming softly as she worked. These small signs of growth felt like victories the widow held close to her heart. But peace never lasted long without being tested. One cold morning, trouble came from beyond the ranch. A group of men arrived, speaking loudly and sharply. They claimed land disputes and old arguments. Voices rose, tension spread like a storm cloud. The workers gathered, unsure what would happen next. The widow watched from a distance. She pulled her children closer and told them to stay quiet. Her heart beat fast. She had seen conflicts before, and she knew how quickly they could turn dangerous. The ranch owner stepped forward, calm but firm. He spoke clearly, refusing unreasonable demands. The discussion grew heated, but he did not back down. Eventually, the men left, warning they would return. That night, fear hung in the air. People whispered about what might come next. Some suggested sending the widow and her children away, saying they would be safer elsewhere. The words reached her ears even though they were not spoken to her directly. She said nothing. Instead, she prepared. She checked the children's clothes, gathered supplies, and kept their few belongings ready. She did not tell the children everything, only that they must listen carefully and stay close if anything happened. Days passed, and the men did not return. But the fear they left behind stayed. It made people restless and short-tempered. Mistakes happened more easily. Arguments started over small things. One evening, the ranch owner called the widow aside. His face was tired. "Some people think you should leave," he said honestly. "They think it will prevent trouble." She met his eyes. "Do you want us to leave?" she asked quietly. He paused. "No," he said, "but I must consider everyone." She nodded. "I understand." That night she sat alone after the children fell asleep. She thought of the other place that had been offered to her weeks ago. She could still leave. She could choose a safer path, one where she would not be a point of argument. But then she thought of everything she had built here. Not comfort, not wealth, but respect. She worked for her place. She earned her meals. She did not hide who she was. The next morning she made a decision. She went to the ranch owner before work began. "If trouble comes because of us," she said, "we will leave, but I ask one thing." He listened. "Let it be my choice," she said. "Not fear, not pressure. Let me decide when it is time." He looked at her for a long moment, then he nodded. "That is fair," he said. From that day on she stood a little straighter. Winter tested everyone. Food grew scarce and illness spread among people and animals. When a child of one of the workers fell sick, panic followed. The widow stepped in without hesitation. She helped care for the child day and night, using simple methods she had learned long ago. She stayed calm when others were afraid. The child recovered. Gratitude replaced doubt. Slowly, the ranch changed. People still differed, still argued, but they began to see her as part of the place, not an outsider waiting to be sent away. Her children played more freely. Laughter returned more often. One evening, as snow fell softly, the ranch owner invited her to sit near the fire. It was not a grand gesture, just two tired people sharing warmth. "You chose to stay," he said. "Yes," she replied. "You could have left," he said again. "I could have," she agreed. "But staying was my choice." He nodded, understanding more than her words alone said. Winter passed, slow and heavy, but it passed. Spring followed, bringing green shoots and fresh air. With it came a sense of renewal. The widow planted small herbs near the kitchen, teaching others how to use them. The children helped, laughing as they pressed seeds into the soil. Life was still hard, but it was real, steady, and chosen. She was no longer pleading. She was standing. The years moved forward quietly, without sudden miracles or dramatic changes. Life on the ranch settled into a steady rhythm, shaped by work, seasons, and shared responsibility. The widow no longer counted the days by fear or hunger. Instead, she counted them by growth, small signs that life was continuing, not just surviving. Her children grew stronger with each passing year. The boy learned how to care for animals properly. He listened closely, worked carefully, and earned trust little by little. People stopped seeing him as the weak child who once stood shaking at the gate. They began to see him as a reliable young helper, someone who took pride in doing things right. He still remembered hunger, and that memory made him careful and grateful. The girl blossomed in quieter ways. She learned to read simple words, to sew neat stitches, and to help others without being asked. Her laughter became natural, no longer guarded. She spoke freely now, her eyes bright, her spirit light. Sometimes she would sit beside her mother in the evenings and talk about small dreams, nothing grand, just hopes of learning more, helping more, being useful. The widow watched her children closely, always aware of how fragile safety could be. But she also allowed herself moments of peace. She no longer slept with fear tightening her chest every night. She rested knowing that tomorrow would bring work, not desperation. Her place on the ranch was no longer questioned. She managed the kitchen with calm confidence. Supplies were used wisely, waste was avoided. During hard seasons, she helped plan meals so that everyone had enough. People came to her with questions and she answered without pride, only purpose. The ranch owner changed too. Time softened him. He still spoke little, still valued order and fairness, but he no longer kept such careful distance. He trusted her judgment. He respected her choices. When decisions needed steady thinking rather than force, he often asked for her view. There was no sudden promise or spoken agreement. Nothing needed to be said aloud. Respect grew through shared effort, not words. One year the ranch faced a difficult season. Weather damaged crops nearby and trade slowed. Supplies became tight. Some feared the worst. But instead of panic, there was cooperation. People shared tasks, adjusted expectations, and supported one another. The widow worked longer hours without complaint. So did everyone else. The children helped where they could. No one was turned away. No one was singled out. They endured together. When the season passed and conditions improved, relief spread through the ranch. People laughed more easily again. Meals felt warmer, even when they were simple. One evening, during a small gathering after work, the ranch owner spoke openly. He acknowledged the effort of everyone, but when he mentioned the widow, his words carried weight. He did not praise her for sacrifice or hardship. He spoke of reliability, wisdom, and strength. "She belongs here," he said simply. No one argued. From that day forward, the last traces of doubt faded. The widow was no longer someone who had been taken in during hard times. She was part of the foundation that held the place together. The children grew into their roles naturally. They learned from many people, not just their mother. They were shaped by different hands, different lessons, different ways of thinking. But they never forgot where they came from or what it meant to almost lose everything. Sometimes at night, the widow still remembered the walk to the gate. She remembered the burning ground, the weight of her children leaning against her, the fear of speaking those words. The memory never fully left her, but it no longer caused pain. It reminded her of how far they had come. She taught her children one important lesson above all others. Dignity does not come from wealth or safety. It comes from choosing responsibility, even when life is unfair. Years later, when travelers passed through and asked about the ranch, they heard stories of hard work, fairness, and resilience. They heard of a place where people were judged by effort, not by where they came from. Few knew how it had all begun, with a starving widow, 2 weak children, and a single decision made at a gate. The widow did not seek recognition. She found peace in routine, in watching the sun rise over land that no longer felt threatening. She found meaning in seeing her children stand strong on their own. What began as a plea for survival became a life built on choice, effort, and mutual respect. And that was more than she had ever dared to hope for.